Prologue. A journey begins. I had felt it for months. The fatigue gnawing at me like a dull ache, the strange sensations I couldn't quite name. But life doesn't stop just because you're tired. When you're 32 and single in a city like London, you can't jump off the wheel just because you need a nap. I had worked too hard to slow down, not after a childhood where my parents cared more about drinking and partying than raising me. With no qualifications, I spent my teens and early 20s hustling from one dead-end job to another, bartending, temping, running errands for people who never bothered to learn my name. I was a drifter in my own life, moving from one place to the next, always wondering if I'd ever find my place. Then I met Claire. Even in a city like London, where everyone has their quirks, Claire was impossible to ignore. She looked like she'd wandered out of a dream, or maybe an entirely different century. Dressed like a hippie who had raided a Victorian wardrobe, she wore layers of flowing skirts, embroidered waistcoats, and shawls in every colour imaginable. Her hair was a wild mane of bright silver, streaked with purple and blue, curling in defiance of any attempt to tame it. Her face was etched with deep lines that spoke of laughter, mischief, and years lived fiercely. But it was her eyes, bright blue, dancing with curiosity and kindness, that drew me in. They seemed to look right through me, seeing everything, understanding everything. The first time I saw her was in a tiny cafe just off Camden High Street. I had just finished a long night shift and stumbled in for a greasy breakfast bap, desperate for something comforting. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and bacon, and the windows were fogged with condensation. Claire was surrounded by piles of papers and swatches of fabric, gesticulating with an unlit cigarette in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. Her voice cut through the noise, animated and commanding, as she talked about some shipment gone wrong. I was drawn to her immediately, like a moth to a flame. There was something magnetic about her, a raw energy that made you want to be part of whatever she was doing, even if you had no idea what it was. The cafe was packed, so I gestured to the empty chair at her table. She waved me over, shoving a pile of fabric aside to make room. As soon as her conversation ended, she turned to me and began talking, as if we were old friends. She hadn't even asked my name before she was chattering about her driver letting her down, the shipment waiting to be collected, and how she never let people down. Claire ran a business. On paper, it was several small boutiques selling imported fashion goods, but in reality, it was a breathing tapestry of her imagination, woven together from threads gathered across continents. She had a gift for finding the extraordinary, handcrafted necklaces from hidden villages, embroidered jackets from bustling markets, pieces that were raw, vibrant, and completely unique. If you didn't want to be a drone wearing the mass-produced, you shopped at the wardrobe. It was an event when new stock arrived in one of her many small boutiques dotted across the southeast of England. Her followers would be waiting in anticipation, keen and eager to spend. And they didn't need big purses either. She would always have something for every budget. It was her business, her vision, her world. She had built it from the ground up, with nothing but her own fierce determination and a talent for spotting the extraordinary in the ordinary. That day, in the cafe, she looked at me, a girl with no experience, no direction, and no fashion sense, and saw something I hadn't seen in myself. She had a way of looking at people that cut through all the noise and fear, straight to the core. She saw potential, a spark, and on the spot she decided to give me a chance. She put me at the reception desk of her small, cluttered office off Camden High Street, a place that felt like a world of its own. I started answering phones, organising chaos, and gradually I became more involved. Claire taught me everything. While she travelled the world, bargaining with artisans, I managed the crates she sent, made sure they reached the shops, and updated her website. Over time, I became her right hand, her confidant in the beautiful madness of her work. For over 10 years I stood by her side, and they were some of the happiest times of my life. But even in those happy times, something lingered at the edge of my consciousness. I had built a life, a purpose, a career, but everything I did was in service of Claire's vision. I was chasing her passions, her dreams, living a life coloured by her palette. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of my own. The consultant's office that morning was cold in a way that only a sterile, dull white room can be. I sat across from him trying to read his face, the wrinkles around his eyes, and the twitch at the corner of his mouth. He had that look, you know, the one. Someone bracing themselves to deliver a blow has. And when the words came, they landed just as I'd expected. Sadie, he said gently, the results aren't what we hoped for. His words felt like they belonged to someone else, cold and distant. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, a faint hum that seemed to throb in time with my heartbeat. His mouth was moving, forming words I wasn't ready to hear, but all I could focus on was the clock on the wall behind him. Its hour hand was stuck, flicking back and forth in a small, desperate motion, unable to move forward. I was unable to look away. "Sorry, what?" I asked, realising he had stopped speaking. A warm hand on my shoulder. When did the nurse come in? She handed me a tissue and I took it, unsure what to do with it. "Sadie, you have around 18 months. I left the hospital in a daze and wandered until I found myself on a bench in Regent's Park, watching the joggers and dog walkers go by. I had no close family, no boyfriend, no safety net. Just a dream that always felt out of reach. A small flat in a quiet corner of the city, a place to call my own. I'd saved for years, giving up holidays, dinners, even the occasional fashion splurge, all for a future I'd never see. As I sat there, something shifted inside me. The plug that held my emotion in for so many months had been pulled, and as it drained away, it was replaced by a peculiar sense of clarity. My racing heart now slowed to a steady pace. 18 months meant at least 12 months of life before the illness made it hard to do anything, I guess. If I had a year left, a year to live, a year to truly feel, I was going to spend it in the world, not behind a desk. I had all these contacts, all these places I knew of but had never seen. I stood up from the bench with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I would travel until I couldn't. I would see the world I had only ever glimpsed through someone else's photographs and memories. I would live fully, deeply, madly, until I couldn't anymore. Not with a sense of loss, but with a sense of freedom. I have a year, maybe less. And today I'm starting something new. 2 days later, my rucksack was packed, sitting by the door. My life condensed into a single bag. I glanced at it, then at the map on my kitchen table, my fingers tracing the lines across continents and oceans. I thought about my last conversation with Claire, her tears and her bright, defiant smile when I told her my plan. "Of course you should go," she'd said. "Do you want some company? I'd love to see the world through your eyes." For a moment, I'd almost let her talk me into it. The idea of Claire beside me on this mad adventure was tempting. She would have been the perfect companion, her curiosity infectious, her spirit unbreakable. But I knew deep down that this was something I had to do on my own. It wasn't about rejecting her. It was about finally seeing the world through my eyes. Claire had nodded, understanding, but I could see the hint of sadness in her smile. She never let it linger, though. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Fine," she'd said, "but you're not leaving me. This is a holiday and you will be paid while you're away." I'd tried to protest. "Claire, I've got my savings. Enough to last me. I don't need—" But Claire wouldn't hear it. She waved a hand, dismissing my objections as if they were trivial matters. "Nonsense. I'll continue paying you, like always." There was no arguing with Claire when she'd made up her mind, and I didn't have the energy to fight her on it. Her generosity was part of who she was. "All right," I finally agreed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But you know I'm going to miss you like mad." She'd smiled again, that same bright, mischievous grin I'd come to love, and pulled me into a tight hug that felt like it could last forever. "Go have fun," she whispered in my ear, "and when you're ready to come home, call me and I'll come get you, wherever you are." I didn't know where this journey would lead or how much time I had left, but for the first time in my life I was choosing my own direction. I was stepping off the path others had set for me, stepping away from the shadows and into the unknown. Timelines no longer mattered. What mattered was the feeling in my chest, the rush of life, of claiming my own story. For once, I was finally finding myself, and that was enough.